What turns a millionaire's daughter into an armed bank robber? That was the question on everyone's mind after 5 people stormed a San Francisco bank on April 15, 1974, with rifles raised and zero hesitation. As the group forced tellers to empty their drawers, one woman smiled as she pointed her rifle at the cowering customers. Some witnesses said she looked like the one in charge. And then came the shock. She looked exactly like the kidnapped daughter of media titan William Randolph Hearst. So, what really happened to Patty Hearst? To find that out, we need to go back to the beginning. Under George Hearst, a mining magnate and politician, the Hearst family quickly became the creme de la creme of American high society. His son, William Randolph, who built a media empire, was a man of dubious ethics and seemingly entirely motivated by financial greed. This would make him the inspiration for the classic movie Citizen Kane. He was a deeply controversial figure, a staunch nationalist and proud isolationist. While he championed working-class causes, his fierce anti-communist views led him to openly praise the Nazi Party and its leader Adolf Hitler. The two men even met in 1934, when William and his eldest son George traveled to Berlin to interview Hitler. While William would later walk back his admiration, in the early 1930s his views led him to publicly praise the virtues of Nazism, framing it as the force that crushed communism. As we said, he was deeply controversial, and make no mistake, his reputation would cast a long shadow when 4 decades later his granddaughter was caught on camera robbing a bank with violent communists. William Randolph Hearst had 5 sons, and one of them, Randolph Apperson Hearst, was the father of Patricia, Patty. She was a good-looking girl, an heiress to a fortune, and the absolute epitome of privilege. At 19, she was a sophomore at UC Berkeley studying art history and living in a plush apartment. On the evening of February 4, 1974, she was at home with her fiancé, Stephen Weed. They were snuggled up on the couch, having just eaten and settling in to watch TV. Then the doorbell rang. It was around 9 p.m., late for a house call. Patty was uneasy. Something didn't feel right. When Steve got up to answer the door, Patty caught a glimpse of a bulky figure through the frosted glass pane. She was just about to tell him to slide the chain lock on, but he opened the door instead. Patty was hiding in the hallway when she heard an agitated female. The unexpected visitor said that she'd just been in a car accident and asked to use the phone. The next thing Patty heard was a scuffle at the door. She backed into the kitchen just as 2 armed men burst in. One was black, the other was a short, stocky white man. A young woman followed close behind. The white man slammed Patty to the floor, yelling at her to keep her head down. The other man swept through the apartment, demanding to know where the safe was. After all, this was the daughter of one of the richest families in the world. But Patty didn't have a safe. Steve, now injured, offered his wallet, anything to get them out of there. But this wasn't a robbery, not exactly. They gagged and blindfolded Patty, still in her bathrobe, and dragged her outside. She couldn't see a thing, and then she heard a door open, the neighbors, followed by the sudden crack of machine gun fire and the sound of shattering glass. Her blindfold came off, and she saw that she was about to be shoved into the backseat floor area of a station wagon, and she started to cry. The black guy yelled at her to shut up or they would blow her head off. It wasn't until they'd been driving for miles that Patty finally dared to speak. She asked what they wanted, and the answer came cold and flat. They weren't going to kill her. She was worth more to them alive. It was only hours later, at a dirty old house where she was being held, that she fully understood what was going on. The same black guy walked into the room and announced, "You are a prisoner of war for the Symbionese Liberation Army. You will be held in protective custody, and you will be treated according to the Geneva Convention governing prisoners of war." The next morning, the San Francisco Chronicle ran the story with the headline, "Hearst's daughter kidnapped by 3 armed commandos." It was huge news, global news. And 3 days later, the world found out who had done it. For many, it was the first time they'd ever heard the name Symbionese Liberation Army, or SLA, a small far-left extremist group with a hideout not far from where Patty had been taken. As urban guerrillas, they called for a multiracial society without classes, where people lived in perfect symbiosis, but only after a lot of violence. They also said that they wanted to, quote, "unite all oppressed people into a fighting force and to destroy the capitalist state." They sent a letter to a Berkeley radio station stating that Patty Hearst was now a prisoner of war. Given the group's far-left ideology and the Hearst family's legacy of nationalism, Nazi sympathies, and staggering wealth, Patty wasn't just a hostage, she was a very valuable, symbolic asset. The SLA had just hit the jackpot. But who were they? The organization was the result of a prisoner outreach program in the early 70s led by black inmates who worked closely with white activists. Their figurehead was Donald DeFreeze, a dedicated criminal and quasi-Marxist philosopher who'd escaped from prison in 1973. It was in the Prisoner Outreach Project that he met Willie Wolfe, the white guy that Patty had said was short and stout, a man whose upper-middle-class life was much closer to Patty's existence than DeFreeze's. The FBI's wanted poster remarked that DeFreeze was to be considered armed and extremely dangerous. He was clearly the only part of the group with street cred. It was during this time in hiding that he met up with Patricia Mizmun Sotishik, another co-founder of the SLA, and they teamed up with Nancy Ling Perry and Camilla Christine Hall. This was a ragtag bunch of posh activists, not exactly the kind of people who would usually elicit fear. Before Nancy Perry got involved, she'd been a middle-class astrology-loving, weed-smoking street hustler who occasionally dealt blackjack in San Francisco's North Beach dives. Patricia Soltishik, who likewise decried capitalism, was one of capitalism's success stories. She grew up entrenched in the upper middle class, an honor student in high school who in her spare time trained dogs for the blind. Still, Camilla Candy Hall had not been blessed with the same comforts. She lost her 3 siblings to congenital diseases when she was still young, and also lost her mother at an early age. Much of her childhood was spent traveling through Africa and South America, where her father, a Lutheran minister, offered support to communities living in poverty far deeper than most Americans could imagine. But Donald DeFreeze knew poverty. He'd grown up among 8 siblings in a house where his nurse mother struggled to hold things together. His father was a violent drunk, always quick to raise his hands, once breaking both of Donald's arms in what was a tempestuous telling off. Donald ran away from home at 14 and soon found himself in New York City and Buffalo leading a life of crime. He had a thing for weapons, including bombs, once getting off with a suspended sentence on a weapons charge where it's believed he informed the police. It's now understood that he was a regular informant in those days. But after a shootout with cops in 1969, he got 6 to 14 years. He found himself inside a very politicized prison system where he honed his Marxist revolutionary ideas. Through the Prisoner Outreach Program, he met Wolfe, along with the Black Panther, Theodore Wheeler, and they all formed the SLA. So, with rich girl Patty as a prime bargaining chip, the SLA started making demands. They wanted the Hearst family to give $70 million in foodstuffs to the needy across California. It's not exactly known how much the Hearsts were worth, but when William Hearst died in 1951, he left $200 million, about $1.5 billion today. By the 1970s, they'd have been worth many billions, so how much was Patty worth? Apparently enough. Randolph agreed to pay. He negotiated a deal offering $2 million instead, which is about $14.5 million in today's money. This was quite a chunk of the family fortune, which made it all the more shocking when just weeks later his daughter showed up on security footage, aiming a rifle at terrified customers. What could have happened? It was now April, just 2 months since she'd been kidnapped in February. But in that short time, Patty Hearst had gone from heiress to revolutionary, now calling herself Tanya, a name taken from Tamara Bunka, the far-left feminist and guerrilla fighter who was Che Guevara's right-hand woman. Let's just add here that even though this was pre-MK Ultra leaks, America was already obsessed with brainwashing. Behind closed doors, the CIA was flooding test subjects with LSD, trying to manipulate their minds and provoke criminal behavior. Meanwhile, the government publicly claimed that American POWs in Korea who defected to the communist side had been brainwashed by their captors. Back then, brainwashing was everywhere, in the headlines, in politics, in pop culture. So, had Patty been brainwashed? That's exactly what the Hearst family said had happened. After the SLA released a tape recording of Patty speaking, she claimed that she was given 2 options. She could be killed or instead join the forces of the Symbionese Liberation Army. Before this, the media had said that the other members had been pointing their guns at Patty, proof that she was the victim. But in that same tape, Patty said her comrades had definitely not pointed guns at her, and the security tape showed that. She added, for good measure, that her ex-fiancé was a sexist, ageist pig, and that she didn't care if she ever saw him again. She also added that the ruling class didn't want to believe that she was now a revolutionary, but that she did believe that the fascist dictatorship of America had to be brought down, and that would mean the use of guns. The Hearst family responded that she was still the victim, that she was under the influence of those very bad people, either slightly brainwashed or had been forced to say those things to save her life. The US public wasn't sold. In the 1,200 images of Patty taken in the bank, she certainly didn't look like someone who was a reluctant participant. She didn't look brainwashed either. She looked like someone who was in full control and perhaps enjoying the power that she was exerting over the frightened customers and staff. It was noted that when the group ran from the bank, Patty was at the back. She could have just run away too, but no, she escaped with the rest. The public's view was sealed. After all, in the recording she said, "Greetings to the people, this is Tanya." And then she explained that the robbery had been to finance the revolution, adding, "As for being brainwashed, the idea is ridiculous beyond belief. I am a soldier in the People's Army." A month later, on May 16th, Hearst's assault rifle prowess was again in the news. That was when she opened fire on a civilian when police were called to an attempted armed robbery of Mel's Sporting Goods in Inglewood, California. One of the robbers, Bill Harris, had been wrestled to the ground by the manager. He had taken the man's gun and subsequently got into a firefight with Patty, who was across the street in the getaway van. She certainly looked at home with her submachine gun and semi-automatic carbine. Many years later, Bill would say, "Of all the people in the SLA who could have covered me and helped me escape, she was my first choice, a great shot. She saved my bacon." She fired 30 rounds in total, and although no one was injured, for most of the U.S. public she was now a violent revolutionary. Firing against civilians in a robbery was not a noble cause, not even for the socialist-minded. The forensic evidence at the sports store was proof that she aimed to kill. This was not a woman who was playing along to protect herself from kidnappers. She meant it. Patty and the others, Bill Harris and his wife Emily, ditched the van and got away with the help of some carjacking. A parking ticket left in the van gave cops the location of the hideout. What unfolded at 2 a.m. the next morning was what one cop later described as a scene from a Vietnam War movie. With TV cameras trained on a yellow bungalow in a predominantly black neighborhood near Watts, FBI agents called in for the occupants to surrender. But in true Hollywood fashion, the response wasn't compliance, it was gunfire. In moments, the FBI agents and over 100 police officers returned fire. Tear gas canisters smashed through the windows. Shotgun blasts and automatic rifle fire ripped through the air, shredding the tree branches and filling the neighborhood with smoke and chaos. It was a full-blown war zone broadcast live on national television. In what became a bloody 50-minute siege, it seemed homemade bombs in the house exploded, causing a fire to tear through the rooms. 6 SLA members died. This included DeFries, Wolf, Soltysik, Perry, Hall, and another member, Angela Atwood, a former high school sweetheart who was captain of the cheerleading team. It would later be said that she was one of the SLA members with whom Hearst had been very affectionate. Millions of Americans, including the panicked Hearst family, had all watched it on TV. The New York Times called it the biggest concentration of gunfire in the city's history. Some of the charred bodies were found with the gas masks melted to their face. Most had died in the fire, but DeFries had been shot in the head. Perry also had succumbed to bullet wounds. Patty was quick to respond. They had just killed her friends. She released a statement and decried the fascist pig media for what she said was painting a typically distorted picture of her beautiful sisters and brothers who had been massacred. By criticizing the press, she was criticizing her family's media empire. She then warned that out of the ashes of the fire she would be reborn, and come hell or high water, someone was going to pay. She and the Harrises watched the siege on TV from a room in Anaheim, so while the SLA had been severely fractured, it wasn't dead. Patty spent the following months sitting in hideouts making improvised explosive devices, which she planned to use on police officers. During those months, she was at the center of more violence, including bank robberies, one in which someone died. One day she'd have to explain that in court. But Patty's plan for revenge didn't come to fruition. 19 months later, after the police had tailed SLA member Kathleen Solia, Patty and the Harrises were arrested at an apartment in the Mission District of San Francisco. When she was booked in and asked to state her occupation, she wrote, "Urban Guerrilla." She later asked her attorney to tell the public, "Tell everybody that I'm smiling, that I feel free and strong, and I send my greetings and love to all the sisters and brothers out there." Unsurprisingly, the Hearst family had Patty's back, with her mom, Catherine, telling the press that Patty was the victim here. According to her, it would be a great injustice if Patty spent even one day in prison. She explained, "I don't believe Patty's legal problems are that serious. After all, she's primarily a kidnap victim. She never went off and did anything of her own free will." About 2 years after the kidnapping on February 4, 1976, the trial began. What was fairly obvious was that this girl from the gilded streets of America had changed. After her arrest, she was incredibly skinny, weighing just 87 pounds. She looked like someone who'd experienced hard times. Psychologist Margaret Singer said after an interview with Patty that she had a low IQ, calling her a low-effect zombie. She said yes, it was as if her brain had been on the spin cycle for 2 years and had been bashed around by a bunch of dirty robbing commies. This was a woman who, before the abduction, was said to have had a high IQ, stated as 130, but in another test they recorded it as 112, which was still way higher than the average of around 100. Doctors said that Patty's memory of life before she was abducted that night was patchy, although it was possible that she was pretending not to remember. The fact was, acquitting someone on the grounds of brainwashing would have been an American first. Then the court appointed the psychiatrist Louis Jolyon West to act as a brainwashing expert. Little did anyone know that West was an inveterate liar who had been a major component of the CIA's highly unethical quest to plant false memories in people during the MKUltra program. He said that she showed signs of coercion and had disassociated from reality. But as we say, he was secretly CIA. The Hearsts were media elites, friends of the CIA, so his word has to be taken with a pinch of salt. Her first lawyer actually told her not to speak to psychiatrists, advising her to say that she'd been drugged. He told her to say that she had been out of her mind all the time, which affected her usually very good judgment. At this point, Patty was already playing the part of the victim and decrying the SLA. Her second lawyer was F. Lee Bailey. He would one day be one of the dream team who helped O.J. Simpson avoid prison after being accused of killing his ex-wife and brutally stabbing her friend to death. Bailey was the best money could buy, and the Hearsts, they could buy anything they wanted. Bailey changed tack, telling Patty to say she had definitely been brainwashed. He invoked the fairly new theory of Stockholm Syndrome, the idea that an abducted person in their shock and trauma can develop sympathy with their captors as an unconscious survival mechanism. It's been described as a primitive gratitude for the gift of life when the abductee's terror can lead to infantilization and their morals can suddenly change. They start to identify with their captor. Still, Patty hadn't just become a little bit friendly. She didn't just identify or sympathize with her captors. She became a hot-blooded, militant leader who spewed hate toward her elitist family. It's also worth noting that it took a few months after being arrested for her to return to being Little Miss Sunshine. The San Francisco Chronicle, owned by the Hearsts, noted the change, saying in an article, "She no longer lifts manacled wrists in Black Power salutes and her eyes are, for the most part, downcast, as if she were sharing a secret with herself." Bailey's argument that his client had been robbed of her free will fell flat against the evidence. At the time of her arrest, investigators found books on explosives and homemade bombs in her room. In her purse was a chain connected to a stone Olmec monkey face, a gift from William Wolfe. A major part of her defense was that Wolfe, who was a lifelong supporter of women's rights, had committed misconduct against her. But Patty betraying her dead lover just made her look bad. In short, the trial did not go well for her. Under cross-examination, she pleaded the Fifth Amendment a total of 42 times. Then came the psychiatric testimony, which made the brainwashing claim seem ridiculous. The government psychiatrist Joel Fort talked about how she'd always been a liar, once lying about her mom having cancer so she could get her own way at a private school. She slept around, took drugs, and according to him, believed her wealth made her untouchable. He called her and some of the other SLA members narcissists who had gotten a thrill out of violence. When she took the stand, she claimed that Wolfe had abused her, but then the love trinket that she was carrying was produced. Her response was just that she liked the art. But then, her own writings were produced in which she said about this man that she apparently hated and had been abused by was, quote, "the gentlest, most beautiful man that I've ever known." She added to that, "Neither Cujo, Wolfe, nor I had ever loved an individual the way we love each other. Probably this was because our relationship wasn't based on bourgeoisie values." The witnesses didn't help her cause either, with one of them stating that he'd been carjacked by the Harrises and Patty, and he had sat in the back with Patty, who he said was very much an abductor, proudly telling him how she was planning to use cyanide-tipped bullets on police. Many years later, Bill Harris explained why Patty had joined them, saying it had nothing to do with brainwashing. She wanted to join. He said that she'd rejected her mother, a quote, gold digger and right-wing ideologue, and she didn't much want to marry Steve. He added she fell in love with Willie Wolfe. He said after the abduction, when they finally took off their masks, Patty realized that they were all educated, privileged sorts just like her, and soon, according to Bill, she was a revolutionary, writing devastating ruling class critiques. He said that she really did believe in liberating the colonized, marginalized, and oppressed people everywhere. On March 20th, 1976, after 12 hours of deliberation, a jury of 7 men and 5 women found her guilty of armed robbery and the use of a firearm to commit a felony at Hibernia Bank. She was given the longest possible sentence for her crime of 35 years, pending a final hearing. To many Americans, justice at last had been served. An elite had been treated like the common man or woman, which in effect was what Patty had been fighting for in her short time as a domestic terrorist. But if that was justice, it was very short-lived, because the aging judge who had sentenced her then died of cancer. The judge who replaced him reduced the 35 years to just 7 years. Many Americans were outraged and talked about double standards. In prison, Patty refused to work, stating that she could be harmed by violent inmates despite her father hiring dozens of bodyguards. In consequence, she was held in isolation, which her lawyer complained made her depressed and emotionally upset. She was refused a further reduction of her sentence, after which her parents said the only reason that she was being treated so severely was because her name is Hearst. She only ended up serving 21 months before her sentence was commuted by President Jimmy Carter. In 2001, President Bill Clinton pardoned her. As for the Harrises, they were convicted of kidnapping Patty, for which they both served 8 full years, half of which Emily Harris spent in solitary confinement. They were also convicted of the sporting store robbery and got 11 years to be served concurrently, while Patty was only given probation for trying to shoot the manager. Emily and Bill vowed to continue the struggle against oppression, as Patty vowed to slip back into her life of privilege. In prison, Emily studied computer programming, and on her release, she started a profitable computer consulting business. But new forensics evidence led to her and 3 other SLA members being charged with killing a woman in one of the bank robberies. She got another 8 years. Patty was the getaway driver but was granted immunity, with 2 others for becoming a state witness. She is now 71. For the rest of her life, she wrote books and acted in movies and TV shows, occasionally dabbling in dog shows and high-profile philanthropy. Suffice it to say, her radical days of fighting for equality and fairness and complaining about oppression and privilege are well and truly behind her. If you like true crime, then you need to watch this: KFC murder massacre kidnapping that shocked the FBI, or have a look at how they finally caught the serial killer with the highest IQ.